Connecting.
Hey there guys, and welcome back to another episode of EVE Basics. I'm Hendrik Taladar, and in this video we're going to be going over ship fittings. And to help me out with this, I have JEFFRAIDER from Pandemic Legion and a well-known person from a certain ad for EVE Online all about ship fittings. So, Jeff, what are ship fittings and what are the basics that people should know about them?
Sure. Hi, you guys. Okay, so at the very basic level, each spaceship in EVE has slots on it for fitting modules. And what modules do is they change the performance of your ship in some way. There's some modules that increase your defensive abilities, so it increases your tank, as it's called. There's offensive modules like weapons. There's weapon upgrade modules that will make your weapons do more damage or track better or have longer range. So that's just, in a very basic sense, what we're doing here. Every ship in EVE, actually sorry, I shouldn't say that, there's certain exceptions, but most ships in EVE have three different levels of fitting slots. They're low, mid, and high. Generally speaking, high slots are normally for weapons. Mid slots are normally for propulsion modules, utility modules, shield tank modules. Low slots are normally for damage modifiers, so like a magnetic field stabilizer for hybrid guns. It's also for armor tanks or hull tanks, or damage control is also a popular one. Yeah, so basically there's three levels of fitting slots, and then there's also things called rigs. And rigs are a little different than modules in the sense that a module can be fit to a ship, and then it can be removed from the ship with no loss. You can just, you can put on a warp disruptor, and then if you decide later on I want something else in place of that mod, I can just pull it right off, and it'll go back into my items inventory, and you can put it on a different ship, or sell it, or do whatever you want with it. Rigs are fit to a ship, and they can't be removed. They can't be removed and kept. They can be put on a ship, and you can remove them, but it destroys the rig. So, generally speaking, when you're deciding to fit a ship, you want to plan your rig out first, or at least make sure that's not something you're going to go back and forth on, because it costs money to buy rigs. You destroy them when you remove them. Yeah, so basically, what can you fit on a ship? What you can fit on a ship is limited by two things generally: power grid and CPU. So CPU, well, they're basically both just sort of arbitrary values. Each module has a limit. So for example, I'm just going to look at a large shield extender 2 here. It takes up 45 CPU and 120 power grid. And so most frigates will only have about 50 or so power grid, so that means this module won't fit. And if you looking at the fitting screen in game, in the bottom right, you can see the CPU remaining available. For example, on this Orthros I'm looking at, I have 56 left out of 575 total CPU. Power grid, I have 282 left out of a 1,125 left. So that's just basically what you want to do, generally, is you want to put modules on your ship that take up as much of the CPU and power grid as possible. So, for example, if you put a small shield extender on your ship, and you're happy with that, but you notice you've got, say, 30 power grid free, well, you might be able to upgrade that small shield extender to a medium shield extender and get your ship additional tank. So, while you don't always have to use all the power grid and CPU, it's generally speaking a pretty good idea to do. Rigs have a sort of similar value called calibration, and that's in the top left of the screen there. So, for example, my Orthros has 3 medium core field defense extender 2s on it. They each take up 75 calibration, and my Orthros has 350 calibration. So that means I've still got 125 free on my Orthros.
And what are capacitors, and how does that play into how the ship works,
sure.
and what that allows the ship to do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess if we're going to talk about that, we should talk about your ship's general health. You've got 3 different types of hit points. You have shield hit points, you have armor hit points, and you have structure or hull hit points, as they're referred to sometimes. What you can do is you can fit modules to make those bigger or smaller, and so basically the more tank the better. You can also have modules where you'll have a lower absolute number of hit points, but you have a module on there to actively repair the damage as it comes in. That's known as active tanking. Passive tanking is normally, buffer tanking is when you just have a certain hit point buffer, and once that's gone, you don't really have a way to replenish it, and your ship will blow up. And then there's something called passive tanking, and passive tanking is it's when you put shield extenders and shield power relays onto a ship. And what that does is that increases shield recharge. Unlike hull and armor, shield will passively regenerate its hit points over time. Normally very small amounts, so you can't depend on it in a fight. But you can fit modules on your ship that will make it passively regen at a pretty high level. So, for example, the classic example is the passive Drake. The Drake battlecruiser has a very large shield tank and good bonuses to shield tanking. And you can fit on a passive Drake that normally can repair about 700-ish DPS of damage, which is pretty big. And in addition to that, it's also got an immense amount of buffer on it too. The larger the buffer you have, the more passive regen you'll get. And then, like Hendrik mentioned, capacitor. Your ship has capacitor, which is energy. Modules, some modules, which are called active modules, will take up capacitors. So, for example, if you activate your micro warp drive, it's going to take up a certain amount of your capacitor. If you activate a warp disruptor, a warp scrambler, a sensor dampener, a laser weapon, or a hybrid weapon, they take up capacitor as well. Even something like a damage control takes up a tiny bit of capacitor. I think it's only one capacitor point per cycle, maybe, but it's very low. So your capacitor, when you don't have enough capacitor, you can't activate the module. So that's a state that's known as being called capped out. So when someone says they're capped out, that means they've spent or had their capacitor taken from them enough that they can't activate a module. Generally speaking, their micro warp drive. Can't think of anything else to say about cap.
Okay, that does that for this quick overview of ship fittings and different things that associate with them. Thanks, Jeff, for stopping by, and we will see you next time.
Skill training completed.